few months ago, my wife's birthday was approaching, and I wanted to get her a special gift. I found a ring for her at an antique store downtown. It was a unique ring, decorated with intricate patterns and some emerald-colored stones. Despite the strange feeling I felt holding it, I thought it would be the perfect birthday gift for my wife, who loved all things antique. I hid the ring in the drawer of my bedside table. I had planned to keep it there until my wife's birthday, which was in 2 weeks. That same night, I had a very strange dream, one I can still remember vividly to this day. I found myself running through an endless, dark forest. The branches scratched my arms and face as I pushed forward. I felt pursued by something. My steps became slower and heavier, and I tried to turn to see, but everything went dark. That's when I woke up, feeling scared and nervous. I tried to calm myself by saying it was just a dream, but I couldn't shake those images from my eyes and the strange sensation of itching where the branches had scratched me. The next night, I had the same dream, but this time the forest was denser and darker. This time, I was able to turn and see what was chasing me. It was a girl with long, dark hair covering her face, dressed in torn and dirty clothes with one hand outstretched towards me. I woke up suddenly, heart pounding and sheets soaked with sweat. The relief of waking up didn't calm me. I could still see that girl. That had never happened to me before. The nightmares intensified as the week went on, making me afraid to sleep. Each night, the dreams became more vivid and disturbing. The girl was getting closer, her body twisting and crawling as she reached for me. The last night was the worst. I hadn't realized that the nightmares were related to the ring until that day. I was running, as always, and what stopped me in my tracks was seeing the girl holding the ring. The same ring I had found in the antique store. This time, when she caught me, her hair parted to reveal a bony gray face with sunken eyes, and I could feel her gaze piercing into my soul. She grabbed my arm tightly, and I couldn't break free. I woke up suddenly, more scared than ever. It was already morning, and the first thing I did was check the drawer of my bedside table for the ring. I opened the box, but it wasn't there. Panic seized me as I tore the room apart, searching desperately. That's when I heard laughter from the next room. My 4-year-old daughter, Claire, was laughing and playing. Confused, I entered her room and found her sitting on the floor. She was wearing the ring on one of her fingers. I asked her where she got it from, trying to hide the fear in my voice. "The girl gave it to me," she simply replied, continuing with her game. That terrified me completely. I snatched the ring from her finger, ignoring her cries. I grabbed my keys and hurried to the antique store. As I drove, I held the ring in my fist so tightly that its pattern design was imprinted on my palm. The store owner looked up when the bell over the door rang violently with my entrance. I slammed the ring onto the counter, desperately asking him to give me back my money. The man furrowed his brow as he examined it, stating that he didn't remember ever seeing it before. Doubt and confusion swirled in my mind, but I didn't want to waste time trying to understand what was happening. I asked him to just keep it. I didn't want to have it near me anymore. I left the ring on the counter and walked out of the store. I returned home and collapsed on the bed, exhausted but terrified to close my eyes. That's when I told my wife everything. She believed every word. That night, for the first time in a week, I slept without dreams. Those nightmares never returned, and over time, the memories faded like a bad dream. The ring was gone, and with it, any disturbing spirit that had attached to it. It happened to me when I was about 13. That year, my grandfather died. He wasn't the brightest man, nor a bad person, but a mysterious one who had spent all of his time alone. Dad says he became that way after the death of my grandma. Mom and Dad had asked him many times to come and live with us, but he simply denied every time for some reason. We used to visit him once in a while, like on Christmas and certain events, and he just acted kinda weird. He wouldn't open up, nor would talk. It was our last time when I visited him before he died, and I remember I was thirsty at night, and was going to the kitchen to fetch myself some water. This is when I heard my grandpa laughing and talking. I went to his room and saw that he was talking to himself in his dimly lighted room, his gaze fixed on the antique clock with a swinging pendulum. The clock's ticking sound filled the quiet house, making it feel a bit spooky. It was past midnight, and he was alone, engrossed in the haunting presence of the old timepiece. I was confused and asked him who he was talking to. He looked nervous when he saw me and said no one and pushed me away. After he died, one day I was helping my father clear out his belongings when I spotted a wristwatch. It was antique with a vintage look. Excitedly, I ran to my father and asked if I could have it. And as usual, he said yes. I was really happy to have something of his. I quickly wrapped it around my wrist and showed it to my mom as well. We were still staying at our grandpa's for a few more days. At night, as the clock struck 3, the pendulum sound resonated throughout the house from my grandpa's room. Suddenly, I felt someone grabbing my wrist very tightly, the cold touch sending shivers through my body. I jolted awake, heart pounding. In the dimness, I sat up, scanning the room to find no one around except for the watch on my arm. As I stared at the watch, my arm started pulling to the side by an unseen force. Confusion and fear gripped me as I found myself being led through the quiet house, with each tug drawing me closer to my grandpa's room. Upon reaching the room, I stood before the imposing clock with the swinging pendulum. The tick-tock sound filled the air, and a strange energy lingered around the antique timepiece. When the pendulum ceased its haunting sound, the mysterious force released its grip on my wrist, leaving me standing alone in the silent room. Baffled and frightened, I hastily ran to my mom and dad's room and slept with them that night. I did not share anything with them, as I was just 13 at that time. The following night, at the eerie hour of 3 a.m., the clock in my grandpa's room began to ring, breaking the silence. Once again, I found myself forcefully pulled towards that room as if an unseen hand guided me. The chilling repetition of the mysterious event left me terrified. The next day, I decided not to sleep, yet the same event repeated itself. It became increasingly terrifying for me, and one thing was certain. These strange occurrences began after I wore that watch. I removed it and placed it on one of my stuffed toys. Hell-bent on staying awake and keeping a close eye on my toy to see what would go down, I ended up dozing off. The following day, upon awakening, I realized my stuffed toy was not on the shelf. Despite searching around my room, it was nowhere to be found. Later that day, to my astonishment, I discovered it in my grandpa's room, lying on the floor in front of the clock, alongside that watch. The creepy link between the vanished toy, the antique watch, and the bizarre happenings intensified, leaving me scared as hell. That really spooked me, so without saying a word to my parents, I just tossed that watch into a street garbage can. This went down the day before we headed back home, and thankfully, nothing weird happened after that. Fast forward a bunch of years, my parents asked me up about that watch, and I spilled the whole eerie story. My dad hit me with some crazy news. Grandpa always had that watch on, never took it off, not even once. He had that same watch on when they found him dead in his room, right in front of that clock. My parents and I always wondered who would now have that watch I threw away, and if it was guiding its new owner to the old pendulum clock, wherever it was.
Subscribe to the channel to hear the strangest stories of encounters with the unknown. I'll tell you the best tales of horror, mystery, and suspense. When whispers and shadows lurk in the darkness, the time for nightmares has come.
When I was 13, my parents bought an antique chess set at a flea market. I vividly remember the day they brought it home, wrapped in crumpled newspaper and with a smell of old wood filling the room. My parents were excited, discussing how they would decorate the living room with this new find. My mother suggested placing it on the coffee table, while my father imagined the strategic games we would have every night. From the beginning, chess became part of our nightly routine. After dinner, my parents and I would sit around the table and play a few games. I wasn't a chess master, but I enjoyed the family time and the excitement of each strategic move. The nights were filled with laughter and friendly competition, and during those hours, the outside world seemed to fade into the darkness of the night. But soon, strange things began to happen. At first, they were small details that I barely noticed. A piece that seemed to be in a different place than where I remembered leaving it the night before. My parents thought it was carelessness on my part and urged me to be more careful when setting up the board before going to bed. I insisted that I hadn't moved the pieces, but my argument fell on deaf ears. Over time, things got worse. The pieces would appear disordered, some even on the floor. My parents would get angry with me, thinking I was lying about not playing at night. No matter how much I insisted on my innocence, each morning I was greeted with reproaches and looks of disappointment. One night, I woke up startled by an inexplicable sense of unease. I went down to the kitchen for a glass of water. The silence of the house made me very nervous, especially as I passed by that chessboard. As I drank water in the kitchen, a slight noise coming from the dining room caught my attention. The familiar sound of wooden pieces moving across the squares of the board. Knock! Knock! I peeked cautiously and distinguished two figures moving in front of the chessboard. My heart raced, wondering if my eyes were deceiving me due to the darkness and shadows cast by the streetlights. Without daring to investigate further, I quickly returned to my room and hid under the sheets, so scared that I couldn't sleep until the next day. I didn't tell my parents anything because I knew they wouldn't believe me. They would say I was making it all up or that it was just another one of my lies. One day, while I was at a friend's house, the chessboard suffered its worst disorder yet. When I returned home, I found the board in complete chaos and my parents picking it up from the floor. My parents finally believed me and apologized, but that only increased the unease in the atmosphere. I had never seen them so nervous. We decided to stop playing at night and just leave the chessboard as a decoration without manipulating it. But even that didn't stop what was happening. One night, while we were in the living room watching TV, we heard a dull noise coming from the other end of the house. My father got up immediately, followed by my mother and me. Cautiously, we headed towards the sound, which seemed to be coming from the dining room. What we found there froze our blood. The chessboard, which we had left peacefully on the table as a decoration, was on the floor, the pieces scattered everywhere. Some were broken, as if they had been thrown with force. Two of the pieces had hit a picture frame and a vase, breaking them into pieces. My parents exchanged worried looks, and I knew they were scared too. Without saying a word, we picked up the pieces and the board, put them in a box, and took them to the attic. I didn't say anything as we climbed the stairs, but I had never been so scared. My father put the box with the chessboard on a shelf in the farthest corner. We thought that would be the end of these events, but for several nights we heard strange noises coming from the attic. We could hear objects falling and bouncing off the floor, things breaking, and something that sounded like it was crawling and scratching the wooden floor. We were terrified of what might be happening upstairs, but none of us dared to go up and investigate. Finally, my father decided to face the mystery and went up to the attic. What he found left us breathless. Several things from the shelf where we had left the chessboard were on the floor, including the box where we had stored the board, but it wasn't there. The board and pieces were very close to the door, as if it had wanted to escape by crawling on the floor. My father picked it up at that moment and placed it inside a locked trunk in the attic. Since that day, we only heard faint sounds a couple of nights more, and then they stopped completely. I could never forget that haunted chess set. I no longer live in that house, but when I visit my parents, I avoid going to the attic. I know it's inhabited by something more than just that memory of horror. My parents still keep it, but I always try to avoid that topic of conversation when I go to visit them.